Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. My name's Thomas and I'm delighted to say today I've been joined by Matt Slater from The Athletic. Recently published an article on our prospective new owners, 777. Still plenty to talk about them. It feels like this has been dragging on for quite a few weeks now, but it seems like we're not quite close to the end. But Matt, thank you very much for coming on. How are you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. To be honest, it's been a couple of weeks since I've done a video on 777. I mean, in my opinion's been very published out there that I'm not particularly delighted about it. But we're going to talk to you about your article that you obviously posted in The Athletic about Project Echo, which is
Mm.
very intriguing name.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
so
yeah.
I just want to start off generally an overview.
Mm.
What is Project Echo for anyone that hasn't heard about it?
Well, I can't shed much light on why they chose the name, but I'm trying to think. Is there a clever reason? Is there I don't know. No, I can't think of one off the top of my head. So, Project Echo is a it's a sales pitch. They call them decks in sort of investment circles. A teaser, a prospectus, a brochure that was published or put out there. It wasn't published. It was put out in September by 777 and their financial advisor Tifosi, who are sort of a financial advisor in the football space. And the idea is to raise some money. So this was sent out to prospective investors who would invest in the entire group. So 777's Multiclub group, as people know, they already have ownership or partial ownership of 7 clubs. Everton would be the 8th. And this Project Echo sales pitch was assuming they would get Everton. So 8 clubs spread around the world, good geographic spread, a good representation in the major leagues, famous clubs, iconic names, da 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 da. And they are looking for about 200 million. This is, they stress, not to buy Everton. That's separate. They say they've got that money, or they're getting that money from their own resources, and we shall see. This is future funding for the group, for the things they want to do with the group, i.e., make all the teams better. Because all the teams they've bought, what they all have in common is they're all distressed assets. They're all in a state, one state or another, of financial distress, and they're all turnaround projects, all loss making. But at 777, like so many other investors that come new to football, think they can do it better. They've got this idea, this multi-club idea. They can save costs. They can share best practice. They can keep player talent within the sort of walled garden for longer. Use each other as shop windows, and they can be a lot more strategic and use data. And they can also do that in terms of their revenue. So they can use data and best practice to sell fans more, to be more attractive to sponsors, etc., etc. So that's the plan, and it's all discussed in this. Basically, it's a slideshow. Can't remember any, but I think it's about 30 pages. There's some general stuff about the group, their leadership, their ideas, the multi-club theory, the different types of multi-club models there are. City Football Group being one example, where you have a very clear apex predator at the top. There's something maybe like Fenway Sports Group, which is a multi-club group across sports. So you have Boston Red Sox, Liverpool, Pittsburgh Penguins, and then the 777 one is the one that they like the best, where there isn't a clear leader, and they have this spread, this differentiated spread in the key markets. So that's it. And then there's it finishes off with some profiles of the teams, and there's obviously they're trying to sell, so there's a big emphasis on the good bits, and there's almost no mention of the bad bits. There is no mention actually of the bad bits. So yeah, that's it, and that's what I wrote about. And I just thought it was worth sharing, because I think it would give Everton fans an insight into what 777 are about, their strategy, their plans, how they talk about their strategy and plans to other people like 777, to other investors. and it's a very positive spin on what they're doing and what they hope to do. But I just thought, Everton fans of all clubs really sort of deserve that level of transparency, particularly when you're in a hole. So that was the point of the piece. And it's done all right, but it's a very niche topic. Let's be honest. Not many people write stories about sales decks.
Yeah, and I just want to. We may as well start by picking up on something that you said just towards the end there about the different kinds of multi-club models, because definitely myself, when all this was coming out, maybe one of the saving graces that I was trying to take from the situation was that when we've seen other multi-club models like the City Football Group, we all know Manchester City are at the top of the tree. They get all the benefits. The idea is that that's the cash cow. That's where they're going to win all their trophies. Everyone else is a subsidiary to them. And at the end of the day, if that was going to happen at Everton, I wasn't necessarily against it. Maybe not with this specific group, but clearly, as you just mentioned, they've decided on kind of almost a level playing field. So how do they sell that as the best multi-club model?
Well, I think it's really interesting. I mean, there are loads of interesting things to say about what they're trying to do, but the different approaches to multi-club. So, look, City Football Group is a very clear example. Another one might be the Red Bull Group, where the kind of point that the leader is Red Bull, the fizzy drinks, the brand, and they have complete coherence across the entire group. Going from the name to the strips to the style of play. It's upbeat. It's to make you think of energy drinks. It's fast vertical football, and look, there is a pecking order. So you've got Leipzig and Strasbourg and God, sorry, where do they start? Vienna? No, what's the first thing?
Salzburg.
Salzburg. There we go. I knew you were going with this. I was trying to say Stuttgart, Salzburg. So, but and I guess people might think that Leipzig is probably maybe the most important in the group because it's in the bigger league, the Bundesliga. I don't know. They're both Champions League teams, but then beneath that, there are, I think, third-tier Austrian teams and kind of feeder teams. So there is a sort of kind of pecking order, but they've got those top two. Another example of the more, if you like, the City Football Group way, but on a kind of with a much lower profile, would be what Bill Foley, the Bournemouth owner, is doing, where he has a stake in Lorient in Ligue 1. He's just about to buy a club in the A-Leagues down under. He's looking at a stake in Hibs. And for him, he's quite unashamed about this. Bournemouth's my top club. Now, I think that's going to raise some interesting questions if and when he gets Hibs over the line, because to most people of my generation, and certainly Hibs fans, Hibs is a bigger club than Bournemouth. But it's in the wrong league. It doesn't have the money that Bournemouth has because it's in the Premier League. And Foley's point, he's coming in from a sort of kind of from outside, he's ignoring, if you like, the history. He's saying, well, Bournemouth in the Premier League, that's where players want to be. And that is how my multi-club will work. We will use the other clubs to kind of sort of funnel talent upwards. And if we've got a player in the group who's good enough to play in the Premier League, great, he's going to come play for my club. So I think that's a sort of an interesting take. Another example of the kind of, if you like, slightly more awkward who's on top model would be John Textor at Crystal Palace. He owns a large minority stake at Crystal Palace, but he owns, through his Eagle Football Group, Lyon, Botafogo, who are currently top of the league in Brazil, although it's got very tight. I think they lost to the team that's chasing them last night. They own a small club in Belgium, and so the small club in Belgium is clearly just kind of a feeder sort of club. It was to give them a footprint in a hot market in Belgium where there's a lot of talent. But Lyon and Crystal Palace and Botafogo, these are big clubs, and he hasn't defined a pecking order there yet. And he's, if you like, being slightly more cagey about it. He doesn't want to offend anyone, because it's one thing if you're City Football Group and you have Man City, right, and they're winning everything, and you sort of say to other people in the group, look, guys, you are down the pecking order. Your job, Troyes or whatever the other teams are. They've got I can't remember now the team in, but anyway, you know where you are in our pecking order, and Bill Foley, I think it's quite interesting. One of the first things that happened with Lorient was they all got upset. Well, hold on a minute. We don't think we are smaller than Bournemouth. And he hasn't got Hibs yet, but already that's some of the messaging you're sort of hearing. Now 777, they're doing something. It's sort of like the Texter thing where we haven't defined it, but it's even bigger. And because they've been on this mad spending tear and they've been really targeting distressed assets, so it's just they've been like accumulating good clubs, iconic clubs, clubs with history. And yeah, they're ones that are bigger than smaller, a lot to do with the league they're in. But Standard Liège are a big club in Belgium. Genoa, okay, they've been up and down, but they're the oldest club in Italy. They've got a big fan base. Hertha Berlin, Berlin. Okay, they're on a bit of a bad run. The finances are a mess. They're in the Bundesliga B, but they're a big club. Everton, big famous club. Red Star. Okay, they're small at the moment, but they're a club in Paris. They would sort of say, oh, they're the second or third biggest club in Paris, but there's upside there, and so on. So it's quite interesting. The group, it doesn't appear to have been put together with certainly any kind of coherence as to a pecking order. And they're saying that's by design. We're not doing that. I think where things get interesting is if these teams start to qualify for Europe, because then you start to get into UEFA rules about control. And we've seen that this season with Aston Villa and the Brighton relationship with Union Saint-Gilloise. Of course, it was a big issue with Red Bull, with Salzburg and Leipzig. So we're not there yet, because none of the 777 teams are knocking on the door, but it's something that other multi-club people have thought about. Well, how do I do this if and when my teams are good enough, and we aspire for success, are good enough to compete in Europe?
Yeah, it's interesting that all these multi-club models seem to be overshopping in very similar markets: a club in Brazil, a club in Australia, a club in Belgium, and it is confusing, definitely from a fan's perspective, that they're kind of putting out this idea that everyone's equal. When if you look at the Premier League, you look at the money in the Premier League, it's hard to see how a Premier League club wouldn't be the crown jewel. Okay, in terms of size of club, as you mentioned with Bournemouth and Hibs, that will be fascinating when that if that deal goes through, to see the reaction to that. But obviously the Premier League is going to be the financial crown jewel of any multi-club model, and that is a big thing with TV rights as well. Of course, when the TV rights are back up for sale, it's the next couple of years, isn't it? I think we've only got a few years left of this cycle, and there's all rumours about Amazon Prime coming in. It's going to be a massive challenge to the big Sky Sports and BT, but there is going to be infinitely more money in a Premier League club. Is that part of how they sell this? Because you mentioned a few times in your article about the losses that these clubs are making. At the end of the day, Premier League clubs, well, football clubs, they're big assets. They've generally got an inflated price compared to other businesses, but that's just the nature of the market. And they were described as recession-proof. They compared it to other businesses. So how do they sell these clubs? They are big assets. They're worth a lot of money, but make hundreds of millions of pounds of losses, which is, from an Everton fan's perspective, we know plenty about losing money. Then how do they sell this as a portfolio, as a good investment?
Well, it's a really good question. So is it a good investment? Discuss. Look, when you're selling anything, you're selling hope, right? And you're selling best case scenarios and forecasts, and we're going to turn this around. So you got to, that's important that you keep that in mind. The clubs are all losing money at the moment, and I think the combined loss of the 8 last year or for the last set of accounts we've got, was 200 million. So it's a significant amount of money. And Everton have been losing huge amounts of money over the last 3, 4, 5 years, as I'm sure you've discussed many times. Okay, those losses are coming down, but they're still significant. And the club is in trouble. But 777's point is, you very rarely get to buy perfect companies, perfect clubs. They're for sale for a reason. And they are saying, we are turnaround specialists. That's what we're about. We back ourselves. Yeah, there's going to be some pain for a while, but we're going to do this. Now, There's a debate to be had about whether any of that's true, whether they're any good at this or not. We don't know. They've only been doing the football bit for a few years. They bought into Seville as a really small. They've only got 15%, though they like to talk about it. They have no control at Seville. They've been there since 2018 and really have achieved nothing. But it does, of course, give them a footprint into another major league, La Liga. They have now got control of Genoa and Hertha and Standard. These are big clubs. And now we can start to judge them, but they've only just got there, so this is fine. So I can understand the criticism and I can understand the defence. What all these investors, the whole reason that people are interested in football, particularly European football and particularly English football, is this potential upside. So the point about them being recession-proof or defensive hedges at a time when the global economy is not doing so well is more of a point about sports franchises. And it's not about profit and loss. It's about asset appreciation. It's about the value of these franchises, particularly in North America, but increasingly so in Europe, particularly in the UK, England. Because we're not making any more of them. We're not making any more Evertons. We're not making any more NFL franchises, NBA teams. Or they might actually make a couple more of those. But the point is there's a finite amount. There's a relatively finite amount. We're certainly not making any more big English football teams. That's great. There's scarcity value, and there is this feeling, and it's been a feeling that's driven the sort of the economy of English football for sort of 30, 40 years or more. That there's more. We can do better. We can earn more, right? TV subscriptions, commercial income, selling shirts, merchandise. Bigger stadiums, more hospitality. We can get fans there earlier, keep them longer. We can monetize our international fan base. That is really what's driving this. You get the Premier League. You start to look at the domestic TV rights. Okay, that's a fairly saturated market. But look at the upside still to come from international rights. That's where the growth has been in the last 5-10 years, and that's where it will continue to be. Brilliant. Well, okay. So how can we start to monetize those fans in North America and Asia and Africa and everywhere else? Because it's really hard if they can't come to the stadium and we can't sell them official merchandise and all that sort of stuff. If we can't take games to them, how do we do it? So we did the tours. And people constantly coming up with new ideas, new hope, untested forecasts. So that's what drives these valuations. Another one of the stories, of course, that everyone's aware of is Manchester United. So the Glazers bought them for about 800 million, whenever that was. Was it 2005 in the end when they got it over the line? And we know for the last year they've been trying to flog it for 5-6 million, and they're going to get 25% over the line. There's your asset appreciation. Now, along the way, they've also floated shares at New York Stock Exchange, and they've taken out some dividends too. So that was an incredible investment for them. Now, the club itself has been losing money recently on a profit loss basis. And even before COVID, it was making small profits. It certainly wasn't they weren't in it for the money. Most owners aren't in it for the money that the business is making, the cash it's generating. They're in it, certainly in terms of sports franchises, for that asset appreciation, for that scarcity value, for that, I own a football club. I own a football club in the Premier League. Or I own an NFL franchise. I own an NBA franchise. Those are desirable, scarce things. And the defensive, the hedge bit is because you and I care about them, and they've been around a long time, longer than most businesses, and they don't get bought or merged. They don't fall in and out of the stock market. They don't go in and out of fashion. That's the defensive bit. They are great hedges. So, we can have a dot-com bust, we can have a credit crunch, we can have the current economic turbulence, but sports franchises, people love sport and will keep watching. And that's why the values of these assets continues to grow. And that is what 777 are telling their investors. And that's what they're saying. And that's why we're in this game. Because we think sports franchises are undervalued. They're not very well run. We're going to run them better. But when everything else is going a bit wrong, people still love sport.
Yeah, definitely. And just kind of my final question, really, because we are approaching the end of our time, in that we've said a couple of times, it's very hard to judge them right now because they are still very new to it. It's kind of been discussed that they've stumbled across this portfolio almost accidentally, which definitely it doesn't fill me with confidence, but it's what they've done anyway, and they are trying to sell it. But it's hard to really judge their success so far. They've only had these major stakes in clubs for a couple of years now. When you look at the likes of Genoa, they were relegated before they took over, stuff like that. One thing we can look into is who's at the top of the tree, who's in charge. We all know about Josh Wander and Steve Pascoe. We've all heard those names plenty of times, but you want to look at the expertise behind that. So just before we end, could you give us a bit of an insight into that structure? Because we've heard about Don Dransfeld, of course, from the City Football Group. Immediately you hear someone from the City Football Group, you are filled with a bit more confidence because they've clearly got it very right. So who are kind of the key players that are operating at the top of this portfolio?
Well, I mean, you've mentioned, I think, the key guys. The key guys at 777, this very, very mysterious company, and we haven't really talked much about them, but that will be on that for ages. Are Pascoe and Wander. Now, Pascoe is older than Wander, and I think Pascoe's getting to the point in his business career where he's sort of passing it on. He's got sons that work in the business. Wander's the main guy in terms of sports. And it's quite interesting, really, as to how and when they got into sport and why. We're still learning quite a lot about them. As I said, they made this fairly speculative and out of the blue investment in Seville. I think it was in 2018. They'd already been buying TV rights, particularly in South America. They have a few businesses there, some sort of production companies. So they've been in sport. Wander's a big basketball fan. He likes, there's various pictures and, anecdotes about him hanging out with basketball players, particularly in Miami. So, he's a sports fan. We know also they've invested in British basketball, again, the basketball connection, London Lions, but also in the league itself. But the real push on football started, I think, in 2021. I think it was Genoa first. And actually, Genoa went down under 777 ownership, but then they have gone back, straight back up again. So it's really the last 2 years they've been really aggressively buying clubs, and they've added 6 in that time already. We haven't mentioned Melbourne in down under. So Don Dransfeld is probably going to run the football operation. He'll be very important at Everton. He's come from the City Football Group. There's a guy called Mladen Sorvez who used to do data for Leicester City. They've got some guys, a guy called Mark Thompson, who was a consultant at Burnley. I think he was an interim chief exec for a while at Burnley, and a few other guys. It's not a big team. That's the first thing. You sort of got Pascoe, Wander, and a couple of 777 guys who would be sort of the board, if you like, who would sort of oversee the football subsidiary. But the football board, is really sort of 4 or 5 guys. They all have reasonable CVs. They've all worked in the game before, but that's it. So then, of course, each club has its own executives and management teams. Because they're so new, it's very uncertain at the moment as to how involved they would be in their clubs. And they talk about, well, we are, and we share best practice, and we're really good at data. Every investor, every club these days tells me exactly the same thing. They all use the same language. If you think about City Football Group, where they have an absolutely massive operation, and they do some of it, a cynic might say it's a bit of a financial fair play trick, because you get to spread executive costs, executive salaries, middle tier across a group, as opposed to just putting it on Man City's books. Okay, that's certainly a theory, but they've got a proper big team, and they do really run that group properly, or coherently to a strategy. And we can't really say that about 777 yet, because it's a small team. They've got this base in London. There isn't really huge amounts of evidence yet. There's a few which they picked out in their Project Echo document of players moving between their group. I mean, it's not many. They haven't had a massive transfer win yet, where they've taken a guy out of nowhere and he's had a stint at Genoa, or he's even further down the chain, Red Star, Genoa, boom, and then sold. They haven't had that yet. I mean, that's very much part of their investment kind of theory, if you like. They're claiming that all their teams have got better on their watch. I don't know, maybe. It's hard to say. None of them are exactly kind of tearing up trees at the moment. They say that all their finances are getting better, maybe, but then again, you could say they're all bought at the bottom, basically. Hertha Berlin were a disaster. Standard Liège not much better. And Everton, I don't need to tell you about Everton's finances. So it's a tricky one to really kind of honestly assess them on, because you could say much the same thing about John Textor and Eagle Football. Botafogo are going well, Palace are doing, blah, 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 but he's a minority state there. But Lyon are a disaster. They're bottom of the league. Molenbeek, the Belgian team, got promoted. That's fine. They're doing okay, but they're really, really small. Bill Foley has got a great track record in the States. The guy that owns Bournemouth, I mentioned him before. They had a good year last year. Bournemouth staying up, I think, surprised people. They're going to, this year's been harder. Are they going to stay up? Don't know. We shall see. But his first venture in sport was an expansion NHL team, an ice hockey team, has gone absolutely spectacularly well. They're the best team in ice hockey and were immediately successful from like season one, which is quite rare for expansion teams. And he's also put on an amazing product in terms of entertainment. He's made them a kind of must-have ticket in Vegas, and that was very much sort of part of his thinking. This is going to be sport and entertainment. I'm really, really going to sort of pitch this at a Vegas crowd. So he's been a big success there. Red Bull have been successful. They've been controversial, but they've been successful. So, and I could talk about some other multi-club groups as well, where it's gone really badly. A one that you can argue is a bit like 777, but on a much lower profile, is this Pacific Media Group. So that it was all kind of sort of second, third tier clubs, but they've built this stable 7 or 8 clubs. Barnsley is the one that was here, FC Thun, Esbjerg in Denmark. They've got one in Poland, Belgium, all the usual places. You said all the usual places. Well, they're in these places because they produce players. These are sort of talent hotbeds. That's what everyone's looking for, and they're also cheap, available, and they have rules that say yes, we don't mind multi-club. Now their track record, whilst they've assembled this group on a bit of a shoestring, is very, very patchy. I think last year they had an absolute shocker. About 3 of their teams got relegated, including Nancy in France, which is a big traditional club. And they all very nearly lost their license. They very nearly went semi-pro. So that was a group with the same sort of idea, kind of flattish. We don't have a number one. We want to be in lots of places. It's all about player trading and data. Jury's massively out, hugely out. And there's other clubs, groups I could throw in the mix as well. So as a concept, the whole concept is a great theory. It's like a sort of like a dissertation, and it may or may not work. And you can say City Football Group is working. All right, but they've got the wealth of Abu Dhabi behind them. Okay. Red Bull, they've got the wealth of this Austrian energy drink company, and this billionaire that's thrown money at sport as a marketing tool. The others, very, very much jury's out. And then 777 coming in with all the question marks around their own wealth and finances and their own business, if you like, their sort of day jobs, and this unproven, untested punt on football, and the fact that their group is constructed of distressed assets. So that's why the whole concept is there's a question mark. There's a question mark about 777 and just how you make that group work.
Yeah, I think question marks is just the same phrase that pops up in, I think, every video I've now done on 777, because there's still so much we don't know. We still have to wait for them to pass all the proper tests to obviously become our owners. That wasn't given a timescale of a few months. I'm not sure if that's been kept to. Obviously, that's not generally something that we are privy to. But it's even if we pass that hurdle, it's then 777, it's hard to really see anything because they don't have a long enough track record yet. That makes it even more confusing when Moshiri comes out and tells the fans that this is definitely the best group that we could get to take Everton forwards when there's still so little that we know about them. But Matt, thank you very much for coming on. That's an absolute fantastic insight.
No problem at all.
And thank you all very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't already, do check out Matt's article in The Athletic. Goes into a lot more detail that we couldn't do today. A really good insight into Project Echo, this magical name that we're still not sure where that's come from. But thank you all very much for watching, and join us next time on the Toffee Blues.